All right, so since we're done with the maxillary major connectors, we'll just jump right into the mandibular major connectors as well. Now, this is the lingual bar. This is going to be the most versatile, the most widely used mandibular major connector. In almost all cases, unless contraindicated, you will be using this lingual bar, right? Now, it is a 6 to 8 gauge thick connector. It is half pear shape. So if you were to take this major connector and then slice it down the middle and look at it from profile, it will be thinner towards the top and slowly tapers into a pear shaped or a curved bottom, right? Which is what you can see in the video. So it is a half pear shaped, inferiorly 6 gauge thick bar that connects the right and the left sides in the mandible, right? Now, I told you that there are some space constraints, right? Now, I told you as a general rule for all mandibular major connectors, the space from the marginal gingiva to the superior area of your bar has to be at least 3 millimeters from marginal gingiva to the top of your bar. Now, as a constraint of the material, the bar itself has to be at least 5 millimeters. So that any lesser it is going to start bending, right? It has to be rigid. So 5 millimeters of bar thickness I need, and 3 millimeters of space from the superior aspect of the bar to the crest of the gingiva I need, right? Now, adding these two, I need at least 8 millimeters of space from the floor of my mouth to the zenith of the gingiva for use of a lingual bar. So this is the minimal space that I need. 5 millimeters for the bar, 3 millimeters of space from the top of the bar to the gingiva. So here, right, in this top portion. Now, I will be using this bar in all cases unless it is contraindicated. Say, for example, if there is a torus or I don't have enough space between the vestibule and the marginal gingiva. Right. Now, like I said, if the spaces are less or if there is torus, I can operate, or there are other small major connectors to bypass this problem. Now, one very clever way of doing this, right, is to end up covering the teeth and finishing your major connector. Now, what was the problem with the space constraint? If I go any closer than 3 millimeters, if I end up keeping the margin of the metal on the gingiva, just like a temporary partial denture, the cast partial denture is going to sink onto the soft tissue and cause inflammation. That was my problem. So the people who came up with this thought, okay, so only if I stop on the partial denture, only if I stop on the marginal gingiva itself, it is going to be a problem. Retake. Now, one of the ways to bypass this problem is to use a linguoplate major connector, right? Now, when they first came up with this, there was the space constraint problem. What if in a case the marginal gingiva was closer to the top of the bar than 3 millimeters? I obviously cannot go closer than 2 millimeters because just like a temporary partial denture, the superior aspect of the bar is going to impinge on the gingiva and cause inflammation. So what could I do? I could either end up taking the bar lower, but what if I don't have enough space near the vestibule? So they said, okay, why don't I end up covering the gingiva? I will go on to the cingulum of the teeth and stop there. And in that process, I will give a small bit of relief wax on the gingival area when I am fabricating the linguoplate. In that way, I will not be stopping only on top of the marginal gingiva, right? I will stay away enough from the vestibule so that the action of the floor of the mouth doesn't interfere with the bar. But at the same time, whenever the patient bites down, the partial denture is not going to sink onto the gingiva. It is going to hang on to the cingulum and provide certain degree of indirect retention as well as not hurt the soft tissues. So that is the advantage of using a linguoplate. Now, it is a lingual bar in similarity, right? There is a bar at the bottom, but there is a thinner sheet of metal that extends onto the cingula of the teeth. And it goes up and contacts and covers the contact area of the teeth. So you should not stop below the contact area because then it will start allowing the entrapment of food. So you go up all the way and then you have this festoon pattern which will cover all the way up to the contact area of the teeth. Now, I told you it gives you a certain degree of indirect retention. If you don't understand indirect retention at this point, just forget about it for now. But just remember that the linguoplate alone should never be used for indirect retention. Just remember that point for now. So in addition, what they always do is, in addition to the lingual plate, which usually extends from canine to canine, they will have two small rests that are sitting on top of the adjacent premolars, and this is called as a lug seat, right? It's called as a lug seat. The indication is that when there's an inadequate space for a bar, obviously, when there's a space constraint. Now, when you have periodontal compromise, you can use your lingual plate to go ahead and splint the teeth, because it is going in between the teeth and basically forming the outlines of each tooth. So it will basically give some degree of periodontal splinting as well. Now, when you have a weak anterior tooth, right, where you're afraid that those tooth is going to become mobile, and you have distal extension, you can again use a linguoplate major connector, right? If you want to prevent supra-eruption of those teeth, again, because it is covering the cingulum and sitting down, it will prevent the teeth from migrating. So that is another use. And if you think that the lower anteriors might be extracted, basically what you can do is you can create small mesh holes in this linguoplate. And say, for example, I end up extracting these two anteriors, I can always add some acrylic and teeth and loop it through the mesh in the lingual plate and convert as and when the teeth are lost. So that is one advantage of the lingual plate as well. The disadvantage, of course, is that since it is covering the tooth, you might have a degree of plaque accumulation underneath, right, on the tissue side, and some degree of mucosal irritation if the relief process is not done properly. Next, they said, okay, like how they took the palatal plate and chopped open the middle to create a window. They said, okay, we'll do that in the lower as well. Right? Now this is called as the double lingual bar or the Kennedy bar. Same thing like a lingual plate, except that the middle portion is opened up. The top portion will go ahead and cover the contact area of the teeth and then form a festoon pattern across the cingula. Now the lower is, like I said, pear shaped, and it is 2 to 3 millimeters wide and about a millimeter thick. When you have very large interproximal spaces between the teeth, or you have spacing between the teeth, and you end up giving a lingual plate, you might be afraid that when the patient is talking or smiling, the metal will show through the interdental space labially. You can basically eliminate that metal in between and just have the festoon pattern of the plate. So that is the one of the advantages of using your double lingual bar or your Kennedy bar. Next comes your cingulum bar. It is basically one of the, again, the similar designs, except that the lingual bar in the bottom is eliminated, except the processes goes up and just travels along the cingula of all teeth, and then it comes and joins your major connector. This is again quite rarely used. You don't use it as often because this will end up placing almost all the load on the teeth, which is not something that is preferred. Right? And then this is a very interesting design. This is called as a labial bar, right? Now, the key feature of a labial bar is that it is like a lingual bar, but it's present on the labial surface. So it runs in the labial vestibule. It is thicker and broader. And since you're running on the lingual side, basically you cannot have any kind of clasps there that originate from the lingual side. So they came up with a very ingenious idea where basically you have small protrusions of clasps that originate from the bar itself and contact the teeth, right? Now, modifications of these two, just remember that there was something called as a tyconium hidden lock and a swing lock partial denture. So just know the names for now, right? These two are modifications of your standard labial bar partial denture or your labial bar major connector. Now, these are indicated when you have a lingual tipping of your teeth. Imagine if all your teeth were tipped to the lingual side, right? I would not be able to insert a bar there because all the teeth are crowded towards the lingual. How will I be able to take it out and put it back in? But I will be able to access the labial side, which is the indication of this particular labial bar major connector, right? And of course, when there's an inoperable torus, the patient is not medically fit or some other reason, you're not able to remove the torus, you will again prefer a labial bar instead of a lingually placed major connector. The discomfort, of course, is going to be a major problem because it is going to sit right under your lip on the labial vestibule. So phonetics might be a little distorted. It bulges the lower lip, right? It's not very aesthetic. Now, just a bit of trivia for you. In The Godfather, right, the protagonist, he wears actually a modified labial bar major connector in his mouth to give that bulge or a very bulldogish appearance of the Italian mafia. So that is a little bit of trivia for you guys. Now, let's go to minor connectors. Right, so we're done with the major connectors, which are basically the components that connect your entire processes from right to left. The minor connectors serve the job of attaching the other components, namely your direct retainers, your occlusal rests, right, to the major connectors. So it something has to run in between. You cannot have like a broad plate trying to connect everything, right? So you have smaller struts and smaller beams that basically connect your smaller components like the rest and the clasps or the direct retainers to your major connector assembly. That is the job that is done by the minor connector. Now, if you look at this, I told you that you have this mesh, right? Number three. And of course, you have these small shaded areas, which are number five, right? So, those are just two examples or two types of your minor connectors, right? You have multiple types. So, the job of a minor connector is to connect the other parts, such as the rest, the direct retainer, the indirect retainers to the major connector. There are four different types or four different components of your CPD that can be considered to fall under the umbrella name, that is minor connector. Right? So minor connector is not just one thing. It is not just the mesh or it is not just the proximal plate. It is actually four different things. Now, any component of metal that is used to connect your metal denture base with the teeth and the acrylic is a type of minor connector. The parts that connect your occlusal rest to the mesh or the framework is a type of a minor connector. The components that connect the clasps to your framework is another type. And lastly, the components that connect indirect retainers to your major connector is also called as a minor connector. So these are four different unique components. I will be showing all of them to you. So let's jump into it. All right. Now, if you look into it, the first part is the type that connects teeth to the underlying denture base. And I showed you three different types: mesh, lattice, and nail bead. These are just different shapes or types of your this thing. You're just looking at the first of it, which is basically a mesh. Now, mesh in layman's terms is like a net, right? So if you look at these patterns, right, that are seen on the left and the right, you basically have like a strip of metal with a lot of holes punched into it. The hole might be of different shapes. For example, here the right side is a diamond pattern, the left side is a hole pattern. It doesn't matter. It's simply a mesh, and the job of this mesh is to allow acrylic to permeate through it, flow on the tissue side as well as the intaglio side, and basically join the teeth to the underlying metal framework. That is the job of these mesh type of minor connectors. The next is something known as a ladder or a lattice type. So this is basically you have the small struts or beams running across the crest of the ridge. The rule is that you will have one strut per tooth or one lattice per tooth that is missing. Right? So that is the rule. Now, the advantage of this is that it gives you a good degree of vertical height or space to set your teeth because you have spaces in between. You're able to set the teeth directly on top of the ridge itself. So you save a lot of space in the type of lattice type of minor connector, which is a advantage, right? In the lower, in the right, you have something like a ring pattern. These are just different shapes, right? All right. And lastly, you have something known as a nail bead type, where you have a plate with a lot of nail beads or heads embedded into it. Now, in the earlier days, how they used to do is they literally used to chop a nail and then place that in, right? What I'm showing you here is all digitally done in the software, so these just look different, but that is how they actually did it, which is why the name nail bead type of minor connector. Now, with the nail bead, because you have this nail with the undercut sitting, the advantage is that it offers an incredible degree of retention to the overlying acrylic framework. The disadvantage being that since the nail projects out, the amount of space you have for setting the teeth itself is actually lessened. So if you have a case where there is very less space between the upper and the lower arches, the nail head bead might not work out well. And another problem with the nail bead is that if you notice, unlike the previous two types, there is no space for the acrylic to flow through the metal and get into the tissue side, right? So you will only use your nail bead in cases where you do not anticipate ever having to trim the acrylic. Now you might wonder, why do I want to trim the acrylic in a partial denture on the tissue side that too, right? The answer is if you ever want to reline or rebase your denture, you will have to trim the acrylic, right? So in those cases, your mesh and your lattice type will offer themselves for easy trimming of the acrylic and relining or rebasing procedures. Whereas the nail bead type will not be able to do that because the underside is going to be in metal. So know that this nail bit type of minor conductor is used only when you do not anticipate relining and rebasing, which is a Kennedy's class 3 situation, right? And of course, you need to have that good degree of inter-arch space between the upper and the lower arches as well. So when those two situations match, you have good degree of space and you're having a Kennedy's class 3 situation is when you use a nail B type of minor connector element to connect your teeth and your underlying denture base. All right. Sorry. All right. Now, what are the important features that you have to remember when you're designing a mesh or a lattice, right? In the maxilla, it has to extend up to the tuberosity but not beyond, right? In the mandible, it should occupy two-thirds of the total edentulous span. Say, for example, I'm missing a 4 or a 5, right? A 6 and a 7. So I have a resin retaining element all the way from the distal of 3 up till the retromolar pad. I will take the entire distance, measure two-third, and my metal element will only come till that two-third. It will not end up go and end in the retromolar pad. So the entire span, I will calculate two-third of that distance, and only till there is going to be my extent of metal, right? And of course, it should permit easy arrangement of teeth, which was what I was trying to emphasize when I was talking about your nail bead type. It doesn't make sense to go for a fancy type of meshwork and then figure out that, okay, this is actually going to create a headache in my teeth setting time. So you should always take a element that is best for retaining your teeth as well.